but now I think hopefully Catherine Mealing-Jones, CEO of Brecon's Beacon National Park, I can see you there, Catherine. The floor is yours.
Right. Hi, everyone. Really good to be here. Fascinating event, and really interesting for me to hear the different stories and the different perspectives. There's an awful lot of learning in all of that. Thanks for inviting me to speak as well, although I do feel a bit of a rank amateur when it comes to this sort of thing in some respects. I'm the Chief Executive at Brecon Beacons National Park Authority. I have been since July last year. And I have to say, we're delighted to be associated with the Our Food movement, if I can call it that. Let me see if I can get on to the next slide. Oh dear. Right, hang on, I'll just press the screen, probably easier. Right, ecosystem. It's clear from what we've heard so far that in order to make progress with regenerative agriculture and with the search for land, which I think is what this event was about, everyone from landowners to budding regenerative farmers, horticulturalists and so on, and the wider societal environment has to play a part. It will take an ecosystem, it does take an ecosystem to make the change that this event is all about, to succeed in the search for land for regenerative schemes. We've already heard about parts of the ecosystem, but of course, the local and on the ground side fits in a much wider perspective. And I guess that wider perspective is what I'm speaking from today. And given my attempts at veg patching, I think it's probably best if I stick in that arena, else the world would go hungry. So first of all, huge respect for those on this call and watching who do these, who run these schemes. And who can feed local communities from the land. I think in some respects it's a skill society has lost. So how can policy support regenerative agriculture? Well, we can support the local ecosystem. That's the Park of Today. So anyone who's taken part in, and thank you, those that have, in our recently closed consultation on our draft management plan, Future Beacons, you'll have seen this picture before, the Park of Today it's called. And contrary to appearances, it's not a pretty picture. Lots of farmers, including people on the call here, are doing their best to press on with the sort of regenerative practices that we're all wanting to see. But unless that's supported by the policy sphere, which is what I'm here to talk about, to make that big shift from extractive to regenerative, attempts to really press out your 1,200 acres and beyond are going to remain niche, and that's not where we want them. That won't help us to deliver the aim to have a national park which is a beacon of inspiration. It won't help us to harness people working in balance with nature to face the challenges of climate change, biodiversity decline, and of course economic recovery, which we've heard a bit about on the call today. So our picture of the future, our big picture thinking, the park starts to look quite different. And I think one of the things one of the ways in which policymakers, I think, can support changes in agricultural practice is to put them at the heart of our thinking and our policy making, but quite simply to talk about them, to make it seem possible. Otherwise, nobody has a vision for what it looks like. So I think policymakers, like people in the national park, have to be explicit that making this sort of shift will require a different approach, a different attitude, and we have a responsibility to carry that into our conversation with other policymakers, those in the, if I can call it, the macro policy sphere. So I'm talking about people at the HM government level, people at Welsh government level, and those who are shaping some of the policy developments, particularly post EU exit, which will design the new sustainable farming and land management schemes, and the thinking which is happening quite actively in the private sector and in the public sector about what gets rewarded and what gets included. So in our remit letter, which we get from Welsh Government, so myself and my chair get about what we should do when we're running the park, we are expected to put forward partnerships and to offer the Brecon Beacons National Park as a test bed for the thinking that will shape future policy. And I think that's another key aspect of how policymakers need to come together with, if I can call it, those with a more pragmatic role to try and make this kind of change that we're talking about. So excuse the typo in the top line, but I think policy support is also about making sure that we as policymakers take a systems approach. So again, that's what we're trying to do in developing the National Park Management Plan. Food is one aspect of policy, but it has to be put alongside all of the other policies to understand the interplays. Local food is crucial to so many other aspects of life in the national park. So trying to get that kind of Russian doll, if you like, of thinking about policies at all level, from local to national, even international, in all sectors, to get that alignment, which will enable regenerative farming practices to flourish, is crucial. And is part of the solution to a range of the key issues that society in the park and in the communities around the park are facing. So social inequity, intergenerational inequity, climate change, nature recovery, we've already talked about. And then some of the other speakers have touched on some of the others. So things like skills development, water policy, what we're going to do with trees, and so on. You cannot, as policymakers, just look at agricultural policy in isolation. You have to look at, again, a chestnut we've picked at today, planning policy, affordable housing, what we do with tourism, the wider landscape change picture, and so on, in order to get it right. And I think that brings me to another key role that policymakers have to play, and that is providing that sort of systems thinking, offering that structural support to those who are working on the ground. And I think really crucially, helping to develop the evidence base about the benefits of these practices to society, which will then enable policymakers and decision makers to guide further action and enable course correction. I think we're, as a society, in an enormous course correction phase as we speak. So all of this has led us, as we've developed the National Park Management Plan, to our food policy. And, you know, I mean, you can read it there for yourself. I'd probably add not just local people, but visitors to the park as well. I think we really recognise local food, local meat is a key part of a sustainable visitor experience. And it's also about learning about the heritage of the area and about good health while you're here. So I think some of my final points are about the key part that policy can play is having that really close relationship, which is why I'm really pleased to be on the call today. I know a few of my other colleagues are as well, to those who are delivering regenerative agriculture on the ground. You've got to ensure in policy making that you get that feedback cycle, policy development and thinking, wider systems, yes, but all the way back to understanding what's happening on the ground. What could be better, what isn't working, what some of those barriers are that we've started to pick up in the conversation as we've gone along, so that we can feed that back into the policy making design process and try and make things better and more enabled. So just to wrap up, hopefully I've kept to my time allocation. Thank you for your attention. I know there's a lot of focus on what's practically working on the ground, quite rightly. I suppose from my perspective, rising food insecurity, rising food prices are a real concern for us in the National Park Authority in terms of what that means for the communities in the park. I think we've got huge potential in this area and in our surrounding communities to feed ourselves and to feed others with the best quality local seasonal produce. And the topics that we've touched on today and the topics for this get together are absolutely the right ones for society and a sustainable future. I'm really clear, as we have been through the development of the management plan, that we've got to start doing something really quite fundamentally different. So I hope I've tried to set out briefly a case that policymakers, although they may seem a bit detached at times, do form an essential part of the ecosystem for success. I realise that at times elements of policy can be frustrating and even appear to be pulling against the sort of change that those on the ground are trying to make happen. But I do genuinely believe that if we work together, we can make the change that we want to see. So good luck to everyone. And, I really hope the search for land, which sounds like it's got off to a flying start, starts to get to that magic number that will enable local communities to be fed locally. Thank you.
Catherine, thank you very much. You can, I can see you again. There's a bundle of questions coming for you. I don't know how easy any of them are to answer, but I'll start with the first, which is about basically rural housing is critical to our Food 1200's vision, but to everybody. Do you see the One Planet development as a critical part of a rural housing strategy to allow growers to live next to the land on which they work?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, I should say I'm not an expert in planning policy. I'll say that right up front. So I'm trying to get the right outcomes in the park in the round. I know a little bit about One Planet, and it's quite it's quite prescriptive in terms of the thresholds that have to be reached in order to meet, the ability to place a dwelling next to where things are. So this is where I think we have to. So yes, I do think so. I think part of the landscape change that needs to happen is the ability for people to live much closer to the land that they're tending and developing. But I am not convinced that the planning policies as they stand today really enable that. I've heard that again and again as I've gone around the park, talking to people who either want to start these schemes or are running them at the moment and are adding to transport climate change and adding to the logistical burden by having to go backwards and forwards from somewhere else they live to where they're trying to farm. So, is it a problem? Absolutely. Am I the person that can fix it? I run a planning authority that has to operate within the rules. So the thing that I can do is help do that feedback from the people on the ground to the people who make the policy to try and get something which is more workable. The picture of the park in the future has to include different types of dwelling, hopefully low environmentally impact dwelling, which are adjacent to land that's being farmed. And equally for new entrants and for people who are currently farming, who perhaps want next generations to take up farming opportunities, I recognise it's a big problem. So, will we try and work to fix it? Yes. Do I think current planning policy is right for that? Probably not at the moment. So I think it will need to change. And that's part of the shift, which I think will need to happen over the next few years to make all of this move on. I hope
Great.
that addresses it, if not answers the.
In part, I don't know if you've been looking at the chat, but there's a note's coming from Zoe Proctor, who's sort of in the middle of the sort of planning nightmare. It seems to me. Obviously, she wants to meet up with you, but I do wonder, the power of collective pressing, if you like, is we have to make a lot of noise if the powers that be are going to actually really wake up and do something about this. And that requires advocates. And I guess we put you guys right up there to act in that way. But I just wonder whether, I look at the messages and you kind of get the sense that we are powerless. And how do we change that?
Yeah, I don't think we are powerless. I think, as I tried to allude to in my talk, and I think others have probably said in theirs, it can feel frustrating. But I think, gathering the evidence for change is a really key part of advocacy, which is why I mentioned the point about, the need for the feedback loop from implementation on the ground to those who are doing the thinking. I think that's probably as much as I can say on it at this point, to be honest, Adam. I can't really discuss individual cases on the call. Happy to meet people, which I do try and do if they've got specific issues. I believe that my planning colleagues are as permissive as they can be within the rules. And indeed, an awful lot of stuff does get granted. I know the focus is always on the things that don't. What we are is very open to the conversation about how to make things better in the future within the limits that we're able to, you know, both within current policy and within what would be right in future policy. So you know, there's an open door there, I suppose, is how I will leave it. Thank you.